Hello and welcome to another Mr. Carter's Science Special. Today we're going to be looking at the kidney and the nephron. For those of you who are following along, your syllabus references are here and we'll get right into it. So when we're looking at the kidney and the nephron, this is all tied in with the process of osmoregulation. Osmoregulation is a process that maintains the balance of water and salt within the body. Adults will produce around 1.5 decimeter cubed or litres of urine every single day. And the volume of your urine can be affected by many different things. How much do you sweat? How much water have you drunk? Or have you taken in any caffeine or any alcohol? And have you taken any diuretics? Now, a diuretic is any kind of chemical that will increase your urination. This particular word diuretic is very important when we look at one of the units we look at in terms of the negative feedback mechanism that controls osmoregulation, but we'll look at that in a future video. One thing to remember though is that urine is a solution containing water and various different solutes dissolved in it. Those solutes are things like urea, ammonia, nitrogenous waste, sodium chloride, potassium and phosphates. Excess amino acids are a big problem within your body. If you have a large steak, for example, unless you're a bodybuilder and utilizing all of those amino acids that are contained within the protein of the steak, then it's likely that your body will be trying to remove any of the excess amino acids because your body cannot store excess amino acids. So what happens is your body will break down the amino acid into a usable carbohydrate, which can be used in respiration, and urea. And this process happens in your liver. So the liver cells will create the urea from the excess amino acids and release that urea into the blood, where it will travel to the kidney for it to be removed. Now, the kidney has two main functions: excretion, where we get rid of a metabolic waste product, in this case urea, and homeostasis, where we're maintaining a constant internal environment of water concentration and salt concentrations within the body. The blood is carried into the kidney along the renal artery, which comes straight off the aorta, and the blood entering the kidney is at a very, very high pressure. The blood is then filtered by the kidney, and the clean blood passes out through the renal vein, and the urine leaves the kidney through the ureters and is stored in the bladder. And you can see all of that in this diagram here. You can see at the top of the renal artery going in, followed by the renal vein coming out, and then the excess water and the urea being carried down through the ureter towards the bladder for storage before you go to the toilet and urinate. The kidney consists of an outer region called the cortex and an inner region called the medulla. So if you have a look at our diagram of the kidney, you can see this is shown by having a slightly lighter red colour for the cortex and a slightly darker colour for the medulla. Now, both the cortex and the medulla of the kidney contain capillary tubes called nephrons. The nephrons will join up to empty the urine into an area called the pelvis and then into the urethra and on into the bladder. Here we have a little diagram showing you the nephron. Now, it's important to notice that the nephron begins in the cortex. It has a large loop which passes through the medulla before returning to the cortex and then going down through this structure back into the medulla of the kidney. And here we can see that in more detail. We can begin to think of different parts of this nephron now. The initial part is called the glomerulus here, and the glomerulus is actually a bed of capillaries and from the blood vessels that feed the kidney. Following on from the glomerulus, any filtered blood will enter this structure here, which is known as the Bowmans Capsule. The filtered water and substances dissolved within that water, the urea, salts, sugars, will all then flow through this particular first set of coils known as the first coil tubule, before dropping down into the medulla and this structure, the loop of Henle. After the loop of Henle, the nephron will continue back in the cortex along a second loop called the second coil tubule before dropping down once more into the medulla in the collecting duct. Now the collecting duct will join many different nephrons, will all come in and share a collecting duct, which will go into the ureter, carrying all of those waste products and excess water towards the bladder. So what happens in each of those areas? Well, the first main process that you have to know about is ultrafiltration, which takes place in the glomerulus. And here we have a summary. Water, salt ions, urea and glucose will leave the blood and enter the nephron. It's important you can remember that list of those 4 items. Water, salt ions, urea and glucose are all removed from the blood in the glomerulus and enter the nephron in the Bowmans capsule. In the first coiled tubule, most of that glucose is reabsorbed. There's a large amount of active transport happening here, so the cells are surrounding the first coil tubule have large amounts of mitochondria carrying out lots and lots of respiration, providing ATP, so you can have a lot of active transport to remove the glucose by active transport and diffusion from the nephron and put it back into the blood. And we want to try and get as much of that glucose as possible so that we do not waste it. The third section is the loop of Henle. And in the loop of Henle, water, ions and some glucose will be reabsorbed into the blood, leaving the nephron. The final section that we need to know about is the collecting duct. Now, the permeability of the collecting duct can change depending on hormones released by the pituitary gland. And this will depend on how much water you have in your body at any one time. The job of the collecting duct is to reabsorb water. Now, if you're dehydrated, more water will be reabsorbed into the blood, so you will have less water entering the urine that's stored in the bladder. But if you've been drinking a lot of water, then less water will be reabsorbed into the blood in the collecting duct. So that means more water will pass down the collecting duct and go into the urine. So let's take a look at each section of the nephron in more detail, and we're going to begin by looking here at the glomerulus and the Bowmans capsule. So the blood is filtered from a ball of capillaries called the glomerulus into a hollow cup of cells called the Bowmans capsule. The pressure in the blood in the arterioles leading into the glomerulus is very, very high, and this pressure forces fluid from the blood through the walls of the capillary and into the Bowmans capsule. Ultrafiltration is the process of filtering different molecules under this pressure. So the basement membrane between the walls of the capillary and the Bowmans capsule act like a filter, allowing all these water, ions, glucose and urea to pass through, but preventing the larger substances like red blood cells and proteins from entering the Bowmans capsule and the nephron. The fluid that enters the Bowmans capsule space is called the glomerular filtrate. It's important to consider that this glomerular filtrate, 99% of it will be reabsorbed back into the blood. And the structures that will of the nephron that's going to allow that to happen are the coiled tubules, the loop of Henle and the collecting duct. And you'll notice that I've colour coded them so that you can see where they are, where they occur within the cortex and the medulla. So the loop of Henle has 2 different colours because it does dip down into the medulla before going back up into the cortex. So the loop of Henle and the collecting duct allow a large amount of water and ions and all the glucose to be reabsorbed back into the blood. Interestingly, desert animals, where it's even more important not to lose any water, have very long loops of Henle so that they can reabsorb more water back into the blood and form more concentrated urine containing less water. This is a very good adaptation to hot, dry climates and something you may well be asked about in your exams. So just consider what we've learnt already. pause the video now and think if you can complete this gap fill exercise to show your understanding of the structures and of the nephron and their different functions. So, in the nephron, part of the plasma will leave the blood in the Bowmans capsule and enter the nephron. The filtrate consists of water and molecules of such as ions, urea and glucose. In the first coiled part of the tubule, all the glucose and most of the sodium and chlorine ions are absorbed back into the blood by active transport. The glucose is needed, of course, by cells in the body for respiration. In the rest of the tubule, more water and ions are reabsorbed back into the blood, and some solutes like ammonium ions are secreted into the tubule. The final urine contains urea at much higher concentrations than in the blood, and it will also contain controlled quantities of water and ions. I hope you've enjoyed this video on the kidney and the nephron from Mr. Carter's Science Special. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I would also recommend that you look at the next video about osmoregulation and the hormones that control that in a negative feedback mechanism. Thank you very much for your time.